Live streaming, Deborah. You're in charge. I just saw the tinsel. So good. So good. Okay, we're ready.
Thank you everyone for coming out to the movie Bookshop today. We are so excited to have Jessie Rosen here. We're celebrating her and conversation with Elissa Sussman, who has multiple books of her own, and we're so excited. We are going to do about a 30-minute conversation, about 15 minutes Q&A, so save up your questions, and then 15 minutes for signing. Thank you so much. Take it away, guys.
Thank you. Oh my God, I'm so excited.
This is our first time meeting, though. I'm a longtime fan, and we've kind of had a little online tete-a-tete.
An online romance, if you will.
Exactly.
You know,
So thanks for being here for me tonight.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just so excited to talk about this book. Will you give us all the elevator pitch of the Heirloom?
Yes. So the Heirloom is based on my own strongly held superstition that vintage rings, specifically vintage engagement rings, hold the karma from every relationship in which they've been worn. And so based on my belief, I gave my main character that belief. And after getting proposed to with a vintage ring by her beloved boyfriend, he has his reasons, she insists on knowing everyone that ever wore it as a way to ensure that it has happily ever after energy. And lucky for all of us, that takes her to Italy and Portugal and back through Boston and New York and Los Angeles on this really whirlwind journey in which she does end up finding all the love stories that pertain to the ring, but more importantly, uncovering a lot more about why this superstition is so strong and what it may mean about her feelings about forever in general. Good? Okay.
That was amazing. I mean, that was excellent job. So you touched on a little bit that it's from your deeply held belief. How did you take that and then turn it into a book? Like, where was that spark of oh, this thing I believe should be a story?
Yeah. So around the time that I was getting engaged, or when you kind of know you are, but it's in the advance, right? And I was having this conversation with a lot of people about this belief and how I had made it clear that a new ring would be the only option. And it was constant debate with people. Some people had never considered that and were very against it and thought it was ridiculous. Some people didn't ever think about it before. And then I kind of introduced it for the first time. And I remember one person specifically saying, I love a lot of other vintage things. And so their kind of pushback was, there's got to be some way around this. And that is when I said, well, I mean, I guess if I knew everyone that wore it, if I knew that it had good karma. And I really remember in that moment, something inside, and maybe you really as a writer just thinking, ooh, there's something there.
Yeah.
That was 11 years ago. So this idea,
not that far.
Yeah.
Just
So
recent,
100 drafts later.
Yeah.
No, I put it aside for a really long time, and there were pieces of it that I was trying to work out, and I don't know if I was ready to tackle a novel given other things I was doing. So it took a long time to pick it up after that. But I had been holding on to it for a really long time.
Yeah, because you also write screenplays and TV.
Yeah.
So how is it the transition from writing that to writing a novel, and which is easier, which is more challenging, which will you never do again? Or...
Anything this, no, I'm kidding. I mean, the truth is that all the foundation from the film and TV, especially the structural pieces. So I used film structure outlining. I used Save the Cat beat sheet to outline this book because it's what I knew. And I felt like it gave me, I really wanted the book to be cinematic. I wanted the book to be a page turner. And so I thought about it in terms of scenes and structure and honestly watching a movie. And then I really had always held on to this as a novel because I just wanted it. I wanted you to be able to live in it longer and just to have the space and to really breathe in it. It just felt like it was almost too precious for me to be shorter than 300 pages.
I love that. Well, it's like you really want to sink in and just play around in it.
I think very candidly, there's another piece of the puzzle that maybe since we're in Los Angeles, this is relatable to people. There's a very different ownership structure around when you write a book and the intellectual property that you maintain, and when you write a script or a TV project, and when you sell that, what happens? So all of that is completely fair in the love and war of the business, but I knew I wanted this and ownership of it in a little bit of a stronger way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, thanks.
And you, clearly there are a lot of romantic influences. Can you talk about some of the, pieces of art or artists that you are really inspired by, or that either specifically inspired this or just inspire you in general?
mean, I come from the school of Nora Ephron, as maybe many of us do. And so I feel like the thing that I always took from her work, no matter what it was this huge central question. It's like, I feel like with Harry Met Sally, right? Can men and women be friends? Even with You've Got Mail, right? What happens when you fall in love with someone that you don't know? What happens when that person turns out to be your enemy? So this huge question of what happens when your superstition is stronger than your love? What does that mean? I feel like I took what I had learned from her and tried to use that. But then I also feel like there's these two other influences that maybe, I mean, Jane Austen is very romantic, but I felt like the depth that I was trying to go for almost was like an homage to the Judy Blume of it all, where, you know, within this book, without giving anything away, there does come up a bit of trauma from our character's past involving broken marriages in her family and things she saw that she had to kind of overcome. And I feel like Judy Blume just did not shy away from that stuff. And when I was a very impressionable young reader and she was giving me issues about, you know, body image in young girls and issues about menstruation and things about believing in God, it felt like I felt safe to do that because of her.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I can see those influences in it. It's really lovely. And just the pulling it all together is wonderful. How much did the story change from your initial concept of it to the final product? Because, you know, we had a long journey from first spark.
Yeah, and a few things happened along the way. So again, for any creatives in the room, there's this great book out there that Elizabeth Gilbert wrote that's called Big Magic. And it's all about the creative process. And in it, she talks about this idea that she believes, it's a bit woo-woo, but we are on the West Side, that if you ignore an idea and if you don't pay attention to it, it can leave you and someone else can pick it up. And in Big Magic, she speaks about this happening and she speaks about an idea leaving her and, wouldn't you know, going to Ann Patchett. So the very first thing,
it always goes to Ann Patchett.
I mean, it's going to go to anybody. The very first thing that happened is, it was probably 4 years ago, I had gone on a writing retreat. On my drive home, I listened to Big Magic and I started to get very paranoid about this idea that I hadn't been paying attention to, like leaving me and going to someone else. That was like step number one. And then the second thing is, to ease everyone here, I really did not want to write a book about the fact that vintage rings are bad. Many of you may be sitting here wearing vintage rings. Exactly. And so for a really long time, or not anymore. So for a really long time, I couldn't figure out how I was going to resolve that. And I kind of didn't feel like I could start writing, perhaps this is a procrastination tactic, until I had that linchpin thing. So that was kind of the second thing. And then from that point, I really had these characters in mind that were going to, little spoiler alert, be the previous owners, plural, of the ring. I had some ideas for that. And so that structure of she's going to leave, she's going to go on a journey. I always wanted her to go to Italy because I wrote this during the pandemic and that's where I wanted to go. So there were some of those components that stayed. And and actually this book was fully rewritten, to be very clear, at least twice. But some of those structural components were there from the beginning. And I think a little bit was kind of, I knew the journey, but what was the depth of the character is something that got changed along the way.
Yeah, I love that. So it's a book about romance and love, but it's not necessarily a romance novel or a rom-com.
Yeah.
Can you talk about why that was important for you and maybe how you perceive the difference in your work and just in general?
It almost was idea first and then categorization after. So I always knew that at the end of the day, the primary relationship in the book is between the woman and herself. And that was always the goal. And so no matter how it ended or what, in this case, men came into play, however many there were, what was going to happen with them, at the end of the day, it was always for me about her overcoming her struggles and her feelings about the concept of forever, about the concept of happily ever after, and then, you know, coming to a feeling of security for herself. And then knowing that she could then make a choice based on that. And then it just almost, that's how it was written. And so because of that, I think just kind of the way we understand like the rhythm of a rom-com, you know, in terms of romance, spoiler alert, there is no like exact sex on the page. So those just were things that kind of felt the most comfortable to me for this book.
Yeah. Do you have any like sort of modern books that you were like, okay, it fits neatly alongside these guys?
Yeah.
Type thing.
You know, I'm a big Rebecca Searle fan, and I know she's also a Los Angeles local. And I kind of feel like, in a way, her books all have magical realism, which is really beautiful as a device in them. But in a way, they tend to always be about the journey of the woman at their core. A lot of them have romance as components of them, but a little bit structurally, I remember reading, some of that and getting into that. And then I think there are some kind of icons from probably when I was a little bit of a younger reader, like a Jane Green, that also reminded me of that. I even wonder now, like if we were to evaluate Bridget Jones, Helen Fielding, I don't know if that would be. It is definitely comedic, but at the end of the day, is the relationship with her or him? We'll get back to you.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it.
Come back later in a couple of weeks.
Same
We'll
time
have it
next week.
figured out.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So this book is obviously about superstitions.
Yeah.
There are a lot of superstitions around marriage and weddings in particular.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And then also, how does it serve Shea, our main character, and then how does it harm her?
Yeah.
Especially in this big sort of, momentous occasion in her life.
I talked to a lot of people about superstition before, and also, candidly, I was not a particularly superstitious person. I was raised very superstitious, then I kind of left it all behind, and then I got engaged. And I think that when you're preparing for these big, uncertain, not that it's scary, it's just a huge life moment. And you want any modicum of control that you can possibly have, even if it's fictitious. You just think like, what's the worst? It couldn't hurt to wear something borrowed, something blue, something old, and something new, and a sixpence in your shoe. I'll just do it all because many options, so many something blues, just because you want a feeling that everything's going to be okay. It rained on my wedding day, and I remember just irrationally being upset about that.
Aww.
And this is my 10-year anniversary week. So
I think it's okay.
It's okay.
It's
yeah. The new engagement ring, though, just to be very clear.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that the reason that I think wedding superstitions can be very big for people is that. And for Shea, I think that I'm always really fascinated by when we crack open a piece of ourselves that we were otherwise a little bit blind to. And I think blind for very honest reasons in many cases. Shea's especially, again, without giving anything away, there's some grief in her past in relationship to really both her parents. And I have so much heart for anybody that comes to the point of self-realization right when it's time for them, no matter how hard it takes, how long it takes. And for her, I think that's the case, where it's come to this, her own marriage, the prospect of marriage, to examine her parents' marriage, to examine the way she felt about her relationship with her mother around that, and then to kind of finally like, now I have to look at myself. And I love the idea of when that happens for people. And I wanted to make it clear that this is the trigger for her and hopefully really show why.
Yeah. You mentioned her parents, her mother.
Yeah.
So there are all these wonderful relationships in the book that aren't romantic. Like she has a really strong relationship with her sister, Annie. And then it's a book about these generations of women. Yeah. Can you talk about how you decided to sort of focus on those relationships, why they were important for you, why you think they're important for Shea?
Yeah, I mean, there are not a lot of men in my family, even though obviously we had to have them at some point. I just come from a family of women. I'm one of 4 girls. My mom, who is here, is one of 3 girls. And we are just a family of matriarchs. And of course, there are strong relationships between men and women in my family, but I've always felt like in my life, things have been really passed down from women. And I think those can be very good and powerful things, and sometimes really challenging things. We trust and believe the women in our life. And so that was really the inspiration. I always love to write sisters because I have sisters, even though this sister, I am the oldest. This sister, Shea, is the youngest. And that was kind of fun because it's not what I experienced. Yeah. So getting to imagine how an older sister, I have an older cousin who is essentially a sister to me. So getting to imagine how she would have handled me if I were to, and it's entirely possible I would have done something like this had a vintage ring come my way. So like imagining that felt really fun. And then I feel like the richness of how marriage and relationships has changed for generations of women. I really wanted to make sure that no one was blamed for any of the decisions that they made around love. And very important to me that people whose relationships ended for whatever reasons, that we understood why that was right for them. And the difference between Shea's grandmother and what was allowed for her around marriage, and then Shea's mother, and then Shea, is incredibly different each time.
Absolutely.
And I think that's so helpful to look at so that we can feel secure in ourselves and also show love to the people that came before us, even if they made choices that we didn't understand at the time.
Yeah. It's a very generous of spirit way to look at it.
And Shea doesn't start so generous of spirit in that category. She really doesn't. She's a lot of learning to do. She has had struggles with her mom in those categories, and there are things that were left unsaid between them. So, you know, I had to make sure she wasn't too perfect.
Yeah. That's always good. Hopefully it's not a spoiler, but there are some dream sequences in the book.
Yes.
First of all, are you a vivid dreamer?
Yeah.
And then were any of your dreams, did you use any of the dreams that you've had to inspire the ones in the book? And why did you feel it was important to have those in there?
I'm such a vivid dreamer that the earlier drafts of this book, when I handed them to my editor, she was like, this is completely unbelievable as a dream. And I was like, no, but it's really that specific. So I'm a really vivid dreamer. And so for me, because I'm such a vivid dreamer, I've had like over the years, book 2 perhaps, like sequences of dreams that have recurred and changed as I've changed. And like, I'm really kind of seeing my own personal growth through my dreams. So that was a piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is I felt like I was offering a character that wasn't very in touch with herself. And when you don't have a very conscious relationship with some of your feelings around things, for me, they can present in your dreams. And I just thought, like, what's it going to take to get through to this person? And what would jar her and make her feel uncertain? And so some of those dreams were a way to do that. I sometimes struggle with dreams in books. And so making sure that there was the right amount and not too superfluous, and also making sure that, again, nothing was as precise as perhaps I experienced it.
Yeah. And I mean, dreams and superstitions kind of exist in the same world of like, how much do we believe in them? How much do we rely on them? So it seems thematically to work really well.
How true are they? You know, I feel like dreams are sometimes like being drunk. Is that the truth? You know?
Yeah.
Is
that my
20s.
real self?
Exactly.
Oh no.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about luck in this book. And I'd love for you to sort of hear your thoughts on it. Like, do you think we are at the mercy of luck, or can you create your own luck?
Yeah.
And how does that differ maybe from what Shea thinks or her family thinks?
Yeah. Shea thinks we are at the mercy of luck for sure. She's such a believer. I also think that she needs that. I think sometimes when you don't know yourself quite so well and you're kind of not aware of some of the instabilities in your past, any kind of thinking that feels like control, like luck and magical thinking, really appeals. And I don't mean to categorize that as a general rule, but that's definitely what I was trying to offer Shea, is this idea that these things are so important to her because the idea of security in herself is not something she has quite yet. I really struggle with luck because I feel like I've experienced so much of it. And yet I feel like it's a slippery slope, right? Like once you kind of dive into, well, that was only luck. I don't know. I don't think I even know how I feel about superstition fully, even after writing this book.
Maybe after the next
and maybe
one.
that's just safer to kind of say like, that felt lucky, or that felt like a coincidence, or that felt, I don't know, that felt destined. Like there's certainly been things, certainly in my romantic past, things that have dropped in that have just been totally unbelievable outside of something being quite magical. So is that, or I don't know how the universe works. Book 3.
Book 3. There we go. You heard it here first. And you mentioned that it's a travel book. You know, we're going all over. We're going to Portugal. We're going to Italy. You mentioned that you wanted to go to Italy because that's where you wanted to go. How did you choose the other locations?
Because it was during the pandemic. This book was written essentially in like the first phase. So when travel was really, the first draft of it was written in the first phase when travel was so impossible for us all. And so there were places that just felt like they would be the warmest, richest, best place to be in that time. And Portugal is a place I'd gone with a dear girlfriend. We had done something similar to what happens in the book, which is a road trip down the coast. It was just like, it felt like freedom. You're outside so much. And that was what I was craving at that time. Italy was just the place I was able to study abroad there. So I knew it the best. But Portugal felt like it would have been a balm at that time. And so that was why I included that specifically.
And then Boston,
Yes.
LA, and
I
New
mean,
York,
I just
right?
homage to the places that I've lived. So I went to school at Boston College. That was the Boston. In New York, it's like I can't fathom ever writing a book without including New York. It just feels wrong.
Yeah.
So she's got to come through New York,
course.
and then she lives in LA. Here we are.
I love it.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear some of the research you did for the book. First of all, I just want to know what the weirdest thing was that you had to Google.
Oh God. So I don't think this is too much of a spoiler. I had this idea of a character that is from the opera world. It just felt so romantic to me, which was ultimately fine, but I know nothing about opera at all. And it became so clear how little I knew. And I like kind of got in deep because felt so romantic to me, especially when they're in Europe. I just had this vision of them being in an opera hall. Like I wanted pieces of it, but like not the precision of the operas themselves. So I ended up having to do a lot of research about that. And then the specific locations where that would be. And that was probably the trickiest thing to get that right, because for opera lovers, and there are many in the world, I wanted to make sure that this felt correct. So researching the songs and researching the operas and making sure that makes sense.
Did you talk to any opera lovers in your life?
Yeah, two people in particular, and then did a bunch of research. And yeah, I mean, and I went with Madame Butterfly. I didn't like go particularly obscure. So I wanted to do something that would be accessible to all readers. That's not being a book about opera. But I remember at some point just being like, too late, here I am. And that happens where you're in it and you're, and I think a lot of that is why so much of it, this being my debut, like a lot of it was places that I felt like I could grasp onto immediately. So that I could do as best a job as possible writing it without having to like be really outside my research level.
Yeah. What was the most surprising thing that you learned or researched?
I feel like the most surprising thing I learned was more about superstitions. I talked to so many, in this case, because my character was a heroine, a woman, I talked to so many women about their superstitions around marriage especially, but really all beliefs. And it's really fascinating to me where people draw the line. Like I would never this, but I have no problem with this. And I just loved hearing that. And it's, if I read a series of books about superstition, it'd be really interesting because I talked to so many people where it was interesting to me and I would have loved to have delved even deeper if the category of their superstition, the strength of it, was around something with which they had a struggle. So, for example, many of the women I spoke to had some strong superstitions around motherhood, around bringing children to the world, around naming children, around anything you do before the child is born. Really fascinating stuff. And I didn't go too into depth with them, but it would be really interesting because I had this, suspicion that maybe that was just about like how that fear or how that feeling about that huge milestone is landing in them, much like the character.
I love that. Was there anything that you were like super excited to learn about that you maybe were like, oh, I'm going to put this in my back pocket for later?
For book 2.
Yeah, for book 2, book 3.
I'm trying to think if there were travel destinations that kept coming up. There was the idea of, I always wondered if, how far can you go on a trip? So like things like that came up, but no, nothing that comes to mind.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, this might be a hard question to answer because this is your first book, but you've written screenplays and things. What do you think makes a story intrinsically yours? Like what are the ingredients for a Jessie Rosen story?
Did my editor tell you to ask me this?
Nope. I came up with that one on my own.
We're talking about it right now. I always think there's going to be like a little bit of hidden self-help in my books. I really love when people change. I love when they come to a juncture and they're faced with a struggle and they fight through it. I love characters that go. Not everybody would take this wild mission. And I think maybe when you're reading, you will be mad at her for some of the decisions that she makes because she decides to go and she decides to dive deep. But I just have nothing but respect for the women in my life and the people that were kind of inspired this, that just say, I will be better after this. I have to do this hard thing. I have to look at this dark thing. I have to ask this tricky question and then see how I come out on the other side. And I think if I could pull that off in everything I write, there's like a little bit of a comfort, I hope, when you read this and you say, oh, I am going through, or I went through, or I would like to be brave enough to go through something like that. And this shows me a path.
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, good.
You passed. Good job. Excellent work.
Kate Dresser at Putnam Books would like to know.
I'll send her my notes.
Yeah,
It'll be fine. So you sort of touched on this a little when we were talking about Nora Ephron and Jane Austen. But do you like? I always think of this as like the opposite of like the "who hurt you" thing. It's like, do you have a North Star or gold standard that you're like, if I could make a reader feel the way that I felt experiencing it, like, do you have one of those that you're like, I'm chasing that?
It's such a funny answer. It's a Nora Ephron answer, but it's Heartburn, which is her very early novel about her experience in her own very public divorce. And I think the reason that it's that book is that character is messy. She is a mess. She's going through a messy time. She's been put through a messy thing. She is not together in her life. And I struggled in my own life and in the life of my characters to make them messy sometimes. And so I think about that book a lot because as messy as that character was, and also that's Nora's real life. She puts it in this book on very public display. Then she turns it into a movie. Then she casts Meryl Streep. Like, she was really going for broke on this thing. But I just think it's really brave to allow, especially when she was writing it, a female character to be that messy and to be that in process on something. And so it's a little bit my North Star because it's something that I always have to remind myself is okay. Certainly in the earliest drafts, Shea was, she was just a little cleaner about everything. And I was so worried about her appearing, unlikable, like we always hear that perhaps a female character might be. So I think about Heartburn because of that when I read it, I thought, God, I love this mess of a woman. And if, me being someone that struggles with mess, if I can love that woman, then that is what makes universality, is that we have all experienced something like that. So that would probably be it.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Also The Secret Garden, which is completely in a completely different direction, but just like
amazing
immersion. I just like, even
also
to this
talk
day,
about an unlikable character.
Yeah, you're
she
absolutely
is
right.
Messy as shit.
Yeah,
like
you're right.
She is
you're right.
Like a bratty
you're right.
kid.
Yeah.
So there we go.
So, okay, good.
You
She's really the precursor. I do. I love a mess. And yet,
that.
This is like really become a therapy session. Why can't I be it myself, Elissa?
Why do you think? Where do you think the origin
We're working
of
on
that
it.
is?
It's in the books.
Yeah,
Can't do both.
I had a separate question. Just about like unlikable characters. Why do you think we're so? I mean, I know I have my own answer to this, but like, why do you think we're so hard on female characters, and why do you think unlikable is the worst thing you could say about a character?
I know, it's such an interesting question. When we think about having come from TV, right? Elaine Bennis, what a mess of a woman, and yet one of the most iconic female characters in television history. So I don't know. It's almost like the premise of it seems kind of like unsavory, or like we don't want to look at it, like maybe because it's a little bit of a reflection on ourselves. We don't like to see that in ourselves. But I think the truth of the matter is that when we see those women on screen and in books, they give us such a sense of relief. Well, what's your answer? Patriarchy, right?
Yeah, mine's just a little simpler. Yeah, it's all men's fault. It's all men's fault.
When it can be one word, it's just the one word. I thought. I mean, that's really the answer.
Yeah,
internalized.
I mean, that's
internalized patriarchy. Yeah.
How are we doing on time? Sorry, I caught you like right when you're coughing.
It was the patriarchy question.
We're good? 10 minutes?
Okay,
excellent.
Great.
All right. Let's see. What else am I going to ask you? So many things. So many questions. Oh my God.
Did you also feel like when coming up in this, sorry, I'm not trying to take over the interview.
Oh, okay. I didn't prepare.
I'm curious if you also feel like there's like when you're first drafting, or do you kind of go as messy as possible and then because it's
I actually have a really hard time writing the male love interest as not perfect because I'm like, my character is so messy, she deserves the perfect man.
That's so nice.
And then I'm like, but he does not exist and he's actually really boring.
Yeah.
So like, how is he fucked up in some way?
Yeah, that's right. So, and it's almost like the reverse problem. I love that.
Exactly. Because that's what pulls you in, I think. But I think we are so much more lenient with male characters. Like the anti-hero is very rarely ever a girl, ever a woman.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's fascinating to me. Were you working on screenplays while you were writing this, and how do you switch between the two? Because I feel like they just like operate a different part of your brain, I would imagine.
They do. And this was the first, I would say, like by the second draft of the book, I wrote a very messy first draft, and shout out to any writers in the room, I wrote it during National Novel Writing Month. So NaNoWriMo, which is this challenge during the month of November where your option, I guess, is to write a book in 30 days, 50,000 words, which is about 200 pages. So I had this super messy first draft, but I was so obviously worried about Elizabeth Gilbert stealing my idea that I had to get it down as fast as possible. And patch it even worse. She would for sure take it all the way to the finish line. So the second draft of this, I was definitely working on while I was working on some film and television projects. And what I found is I couldn't work on them on the same day. So I had to divide out the week because also I think the exhaustion of working on one writing project in a day, let alone two, but the nature of writing in prose and then writing in television screenplay structure was just, you're absolutely right. It was too much for my brain to switch during a day. And so that's what I did. I divided up the week and just days were dedicated to this and days were dedicated to that. And that helped. In a certain way, I do think that this book is dialogue heavy because that's kind of the school and the love that I come from. So some of that was helpful to still be in that thinking space. But yeah, definitely having to switch my brain off was something that became like an every other day thing.
Yeah. Did any of them bleed through? Like, did you start writing in your screenplay, stuff that you're like, oh wait, this is actually more of the character of Shea, and then vice versa, like things in your book, you're like, this is actually not, this is coming from.
Yeah. Well, and unbeknownst to me, I was working on a project about a female lead in a messy situation. And I didn't even realize it, but there were both had characters named Annie. So Annie was in the book and Annie was in the screenplay, and they'd happened at different times. So but yeah. And so now I'm, and I didn't want to change it at that point. So now I'm like literally writing dialogue as one Annie who was completely different from the second Annie.
Oh, man.
And that was a little bit of a mess. And I would have to like literally sit down and say, this is this Annie. And she, almost like give myself a pep talk because yeah, absolutely. And it just kind of comes through. Yeah. So embedded in you.
And are your screenplays and shows, do they sort of follow a similar theme about focusing on women and maybe a little bit of romantic stuff or like?
Yeah, they really do, which is so funny to now think of that. This is like my 13th or 14th year living here in Los Angeles, but before television and film, I was a longtime blogger and wrote magazine articles, and everything has really always been on the subject of like, almost if we could say very broadly, like coming of age, whatever that means, at whatever milestone you're facing. And so, yeah, at the same time, I was writing a project about a woman that kind of has a pretty significant, like what we would call a Karen episode. So she gets very messy, and then how it ultimately changes her own family. And then another about a woman who was kind of the straight woman in a group of people who all of the parents in her friend group happen to be gay. And she's in a straight relationship and doesn't have children, which is personal to my story as well. And so, yeah, all just these characters that are kind of at these junctures where they're kind of faced with these decisions and how are they going to move forward.
Yeah.
Funny. Okay. I do have a brand.
Yeah, you do. There you go.
Good timing.
Yeah. Perfect timing. You figured out your brand. Excellent. What does your algorithm look like these days? Like what's popping up on your social media that you are like,
it's like author heavy, but
I love it.
The other thing that's popping up on my social media a lot is travel. And I don't know if it's because just like travel hacks, new travel companies. And maybe it's because I've been talking a lot about the book, like quite literally the algorithm is hearing me, but it is a lot of independent solo travelers. I took a solo trip for my birthday last year. And since then I've been getting a lot of like that popping up. And the other thing I have so much of right now is, and this feels like old, but like interspecies friendships, like a duck and a goat.
Love it.
So much right now. And I don't know if it's just because I'm in a bit of an anxious moment in my life and the internet knows that what I need. But
I wish the internet was that kind. I don't think it is.
But it's just, I'm getting constantly fed that. And I like to believe that the internet is like a little bit of a, like it's giving me a tender hug in the form of, oh my God, there's this one where it's a dog. It's a dog and a duck and something else. So it's like this beautiful triad on this farm. And I think it possibly comes from the fact that I follow a lot of farms. I couldn't be further from a person that would live on a farm. And maybe that's why.
You're living vicariously through these farm animals.
I know.
Like, I just love is possible for all of us.
Here in the LA area, there's this beautiful place called the Gentle Barn, which I don't know about because I've never actually been there, but I spend hours watching their internet. I just love the farm.
I love that you've never been there, but you're like, I know
never been to
everything about
To be
it.
totally honest with you, I don't even know that I want to go. I just want to,
You just want the Instagram version.
I
of
want to
it.
look at it
Yeah.
from here.
Yeah. Is there a particular animal on the farm that you're like?
So right now, you know how they have the smaller cows and they're curly haired?
That's
Yeah.
real cute.
And if you go, which I think is rather expensive, you can hug them. I know.
Oh my God.
Which I don't know. Do I want to do that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I obviously, I
You
tried
wanna
to answer
see
this
it.
question with a nice authors are on my feed. And then I was like, you know what? It's fine.
No, we want to know farms. We want to know the real,
So much farms.
the real stuff
Yeah.
that's happening.
Yeah.
Because animals are important.
It's true. And you need it
You
during
need it.
this
Yeah.
anxious time.
Yes. Tell us a little bit about what's next, and then we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah, so I was so lucky with the sale of this book to have a 2-book deal as part of this process. And I feel like I was even, thank you. I feel like I was even more fortunate to have the opportunity for that not to be a required sequel. So we're calling the second book, which is very much in process. I was telling Elissa, it's due soon. First draft is due soon, but we're calling it a spiritual sister in that we're playing with a huge belief system again, looking at my friend Deborah because it's astrology. And we're playing with the idea of the reverse character of Shea. So Shea started as this believer who needed to unwind her very strong belief in something to really ground herself in reality. And I wanted to write the reverse. And so this new character is a total skeptic, couldn't be further from someone that would believe in astrology. She's a doctor. And yet something kind of happens in her life to trigger her questioning what could be true and if there could be something bigger going on. So she too will kind of be at this juncture. She too will go on a big journey that takes her through almost like Shea had a mission, and this character will do that too. And they'll kind of be companions in that way.
Where do you fall on that spectrum when it comes to?
I know this is such a good question.
And also, what's your sign?
My sign. So I'm going to give you all three because there's some people in the room that
kind of answers
the
my
language.
first question
That
a little
answers your
bit.
first question.
Just
That I know that there are
that
three.
you know there are three and you know them.
So
offhand.
I'm a Leo sun with a Leo rising and a Cancer moon.
I'm nodding as if I know
Oh,
what that is.
you are
I just
convincing.
know my own sign. That's
Yeah,
literally
and
it.
just for my friends here, Leos are in the first house and Cancer's in the 12th. So I know a lot about this only because of this book and how much research I've done. I feel from some of the readings that I've had in the past, just for fun, really connected to my astrology. And yet all of the research that I've done for the book, of course, the historic nature of astrology and the practical nature of it makes it hard to fully believe. But I think it's a really beautiful tool.
Yeah.
Some of the biggest questions or uncertainties in my life, using astrology was a way, almost like superstition. It was kind of a way to step forward and just to say, well, if apparently this is in my destiny, well then. And I think the other thing is there've been some things about myself that I'm like, oh man, that's a bummer that I keep wanting to do that, or that I feel that way about that. And then, astrology gives you this kind of lovely permission. Like, I just keep following this direction. I just keep doing this thing. I just keep feeling this way. One of the big things for me is I just really love a lot of alone time. And I've always kind of felt weird about that. Like,
alone time
that's
is
not
amazing.
Yes. But it's just like something I felt a little bit weird about. And so my astrology says it's fine.
Well, there you go.
In fact, it's the pathway to my genius.
So
what can I do but go to Ohio?
You have to do it. The stars demand it.
Exactly. And I will say, life is better for it.
There you go.
So
there you go. Embrace your true Leo.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, and I mean, if all goes according to plan, we'll see. We could be here this exact time next year talking about that book. Yeah. We'll see. So exciting. We'll see.
Oh my God. Okay, we're gonna open it up
nice
to
note
questions.
thank you.
Does anyone have any? I mean, I could still ask. I've got plenty, but like, come on, you guys, I'm sure have some questions. Don't be shy. I see your hand tentatively rise. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I had this thought. I'm a person about superstition, astrology, and just stuff.
Yeah.
I put it over there.
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like astrology or these things are predictive, or if they are, I don't want to know.
Yeah.
And yet I've had experiences where superstition, I moved into a house. We tried to buy this house 20 years ago. It came back into our life and we bought it. But I happen to know that every single couple in this house has gotten divorced.
Oh, fascinating, Kathy.
And so I was confronted with,
Yeah.
what do you do? I knew some of the stories, but it was not pretty.
Yeah.
And I'm married to my high school sweetheart.
Yeah.
We've been together for eons, and I have to say, I'll reveal here, like I smudged before, like we
Good
both
for you.
did, and we both, and so I just have a question: how do you feel? Like, does your character? How does she feel about being super? Is it something she, is committed to? Is something she like? Oh, I don't want to feel that way, or it's just like I had this ominous feeling with this house. Like, I better just like take care of this if there is bad karma.
Yeah.
So I was curious about your character's feelings about, like having that belief.
Yeah. I really think that's one of the biggest changes that she goes through over the course of the book is she starts loving her superstition, not only secure about it. As a little spoiler, one of the first conversations she has with the man that ultimately becomes her fiance, she makes very clear her superstitions because she is like, you're going to hear it on the first date. That's how important these are to her. And then over the course of the journey, I think she starts to almost resent them. Like, this is messing things up. I have these strong feelings about this person that I love and I can envision a future with. And this crap is going to get in the way that, I have no proof of. So she starts to kind of have this negative relationship with her superstition because it's getting in the way of and potentially really jeopardizing her reality. And then the superstition almost becomes a path to her real reality, which is, and it's funny, if she were here and we could interview her, an odd thought, I feel like she would say, and I feel this way about some of my own superstitions. Thank goodness for that superstition, because in her case, it became the path to certainty over her reality. And I don't know if that's always the case. I think that we kind of, with all belief systems, religion, superstition, astrology, anything, we kind of have to like live with the hang of uncertainty. And that's why I respect nothing more than saying like that stays over there and I'm not going to touch it because it is ominous.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Kathy.
And sometimes you have to smudge.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you smudged. Yeah. Everyone knows she smudged with sage. This is a room where everyone knows what that means. The others have smudged. Did you have a question in the front?
I did. So as part of the process, is there a part that either one of your editors or you cut, deleted, that you kind of mourn?
Yeah.
Killing your babies.
Yeah. This book had a lot of different endings. And there was one ending that I think it was really precious to me because it was the first thing I came up with. And I was so proud of it. It just, it tied things up way too much. It was too much of a bow. It was too neat and tidy, but I had like rigged this thing where all these things fall into place and this like magical thing comes together. And I completely understand why it read green in terms of like an offering. There wasn't as much depth to it, but boy, was I proud of that ending. And I remember thinking like, I understand, but it is absolutely saved in a document somewhere, like Pieces of My Heart is the title. And then the second thing is actually so funny. I don't think this will be a spoiler. There were two more words as the last two words of the book, and I know they were superfluous, and it was wise from an editorial standpoint to cut them. But in my mind, when I read the last sentence of the book, I read it with two more words. And I know it's a silly thing, and I am a wordy person. We've learned that tonight, and so I think I just for whatever reason, I totally know why it needed to be cut, but I hear them in my head. I'll tell you later what they are.
You just add them to everyone's book.
I'm going to sign your book and write
just
them
like put it in.
down. Don't tell Putnam. Yeah, but it's
a
so
special
funny.
edition.
Do you feel that way? You just get like kind of like married to words and sentences sometimes, and I don't know. It's hard.
It is. I think for me, it's like if I really, really feel connected to something, then I know I have to work harder to earn it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a great point. And there are some things that sometimes the edit is very clear and it's literally like more like a line edit and they take out words and take out sections. And sometimes the edit is kind of like, this isn't clear to me, or this isn't making sense, or unless this, I would suggest cutting this. And that's the stuff that I almost appreciate those notes because it's almost like the person is kind of saying like, I think I see what you're doing here, but you're not doing it enough or well enough.
Yeah. Or this is what I'm getting out of it. Is this what you
intended
to,
right.
to
Which
have?
Is always so fascinating. And I'm sure that will happen with friends here, right? In terms of when you read it, there will be things that you pick up on that or just perhaps from your own experience. And the same thing happens with the editorial where they speak about that.
Oh, for sure.
It's amazing. I mean, I cannot believe, as hard as it is to write a novel, I can't fathom editing novels. And I know we edit them, we fix the writing,
but it's like we're working on our own stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing process to me. So I'm grateful.
Yeah. I mean, a good editor is rare.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
very lucky to have a good one.
I agree. Yeah. Anything else, friends? Yeah.
Yeah. Besides your prowess with writing, one of the things I noticed you're amazing at is marketing.
Oh,
and
thank
in
you.
terms of all the reels that you make. And in this day and age, right, we need to let people know about this wonderful book. And I'm curious, do you have a framework for that? And how often are you creating them?
Yeah, you're so right about this. And it was around the time of preparing to potentially even sell this book. I was already anxious about that. It's been like an area that I haven't felt a ton of comfort around. And I just thought, knowing the landscape, if it's because I was unwilling to figure out social media that this book doesn't do well, I will be damned. I just wanted it to be fun. I wanted it to be creative. And so I kind of let myself erase my apprehensions about it, feeling silly doing it. And I kind of got mentally ready to take it on. And then I hired a really wise woman that does a very cool boot camp for people that are apprehensive about social media and suddenly need to include it in their lives. And I was so delighted to find that person existed. Her name is Tara Van Slyke. I sing her praises all the time because I think most of the business of social media, if you're someone that's in a position to pay for help, is they just make the content for you. And I just didn't. First of all, it didn't feel like a smart investment for me as I hope to continue needing to do this. And so this idea of being taught like a very teach a woman to fish situation felt like that would be great. It remains a negotiation with my self-confidence. It really does. You make these little things and you do it 1,000 times and you see yourself on screen and you're really working on feeling authentic. It's a wild thing, especially as someone who I kind of grew up and then social media came into play, but I'm trying to have fun with it. I'm learning to have more fun with it. And I have to say that it was some of the best investment that I made was really working with someone that helped me be me online. And I think that's kind of working out.
Yeah, you're doing.
Thanks for saying that.
Amazing.
It's been fun. Yeah.
I mean, that's the highest praise, that it's fun.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And it's so clear when it isn't.
Yes.
And she's kind of giving me that direction. And there are some great examples online, things that you can just kind of say okay, I could make this work or I could do that. But yeah it's getting better. Yeah. Yes, hi.
You said that coming of age has been your brand for a long time. I'm curious what wisdom we would find in the heirloom since you wrote it at this age than we would if we saw a Jessie Rosen at 20 or 30 years old writing the same story.
I don't know that she could have. I don't know. I feel like it's even really interesting because, as I said, I've been married 10 years this week. And I don't know that I knew enough. I was firm in my decision to marry the amazing person that I did, who's sitting right over there. And yet, I really think it's taken being in that marriage for this long, being willing to look at, things about myself. I don't think that a younger version of me would have written this book. Or I think I probably would have written almost frankly shallower version of this book. I don't think I would have had the courage to put some of this stuff down that feels like it's this age. The very first thing that I did in my writing career was a blog, and there was some depth to it from time to time, but it was like a funny, rompy, you're in your 20s, you're running around Manhattan kind of blog. And I remember being so afraid on the days when I would write something more vulnerable to publish it. It was online. And I just feel like that is what has changed, kind of the courage to be able to say some things with the depth of it. But that's such a good question. We'll talk more about it later.
Anyone else? Any questions?
Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you guys
so much.
Really appreciate everybody coming. We've got both of these amazing authors' books up here if you want to come buy one.
And before we close, there are many people in this room who have not only been with me for my entire life, but really, really people who have been with me for my writing life. There are members of my beloved prompt writing group here. There are dear friends who have been with me in the trenches, and it's just so special to celebrate with everyone here. So thank you so much. Yay. New friends as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, so you,
Signing, right?
Yes.
and yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll sign anything. Where should I sit? Just sit here.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, I just must fix my scarf.
I mean, it's so cute.
Thank you so much.
We're gonna rush to sign first.
Hey,
'Cause
honey.
I'm gonna go back to the.
Your infant? My pleasure. Okay, should I sign yours for you?
Mom, this is mine, and my mom got a copy too.